Hello, Watch on your movie Madman, and I'm back. And today's Friday, so today we're continuing our subject of Censored versus Uncut. And today I'm referring to it as Then and Now. I'm going to be talking about films that were cut down to a BBFC PG and then years later have been released uncut as 12s, and just telling you the difference between them. So very exciting today for you, eh? So I don't have loads to hold up today, mainly some of the Blu-rays I found out when I was preparing for this video that I've lent them to people, which was quite amusing because I couldn't remember who I'd lent them to. Don't freak out, alright? Keep them for as long as you like, it's fine. I might look down a lot occasionally doing this, mainly because my notes are on the floor down here, but I will edit around that if I can. So without delaying any further, we're just gonna begin, I think. This mainly affects British releases of movies, mainly because I'm pretty sure all of these films down here were released uncut for the first time when they were originally released in the US. You might be thinking, if you're from the US, but that wasn't edited when it was in the cinema, and you'd be right, it wasn't edited in the cinema in the US when it first came out, but Britain is a big bunch of pussies and we had to have violence toned down a lot for us, or language toned down a lot for us when we were back in the olden days. So that's what this is. Very briefly, the first film I'm going to mention is Big, as in the film where a little boy wishes he was big and then he turns into Tom Hanks. So when this was released in England, it was a PG because they had to cut out one use of strong language. Yeah, because you're not allowed strong language in PG. You can't say fuck in a PG, that's naughty. But then a few years later, like 2004, 2005 time, they were like, do you know what? It's time. Let's put that scene of strong language back into the film and just raise it to a 12, which is exactly what they did. So that's your first film for you, is Big. Second film I'm going to mention, so 2 and 3 are Hot Shots and Hot Shots Part 2. Both of them were cut in England. The first one was cut for, again, one use of strong language, and it was also cut down. There was a scene where Charlie Sheen's talking to Kevin Dunn and he mentioned something about having a threesome with his sister. That was obviously cut out of the PG version as well, and they're both put back in to the uncut version and made to a 12. Then the second one they cut out a use of strong language. In fact, I'm pretty sure they cut out 2 uses of strong language from the second Hot Shots. There's also a sex scene in the second Hot Shots which is taking the piss out of Basic Instinct, which is allegedly removed from the PG version, but for some reason I think I remember seeing that in the PG version. But then there are later PG versions of it that I saw where it was missing, and then it was put back in again in the 12 version. So I'm not really sure what happened back then. Maybe it was accidentally left in the PG version and they were like, oh crap, we've got to cut that out, and then it was re-released edited, but I don't know, I wasn't there. And there's also a scene towards the end where Romana is talking to Topper and she says something about wanting to pleasure him and fondle him all night long or something like that for months or something like that, and that was obviously cut out of the PG version as well. And there was also a scene with nunchucks when they're fighting at the beginning, the Rambo bit at the beginning of Hot Shots 2. There's a bit with nunchucks that was removed from the PG version because, again, back in those days, the BBFC didn't like the presence of nunchucks in PGs. But yeah, so then Hot Shots Part 2 was then released as a 12 as well, so it's more exciting information for you as well. Next up we have Mrs. Doubtfire. Now, Mrs. Doubtfire The PG version had one scene removed. I say removed, had one scene toned down in the restaurant when Mrs. Doubtfire is talking to Pierce Brosnan, and she mentions something to do with cunnilingus, although he refers to it as cunning linguists, but you know, the insinuations there, so there was that. So they just had to tone down the sexual side of the conversation a little bit, because Robin Williams just went off on one a little bit when he came to improv, like he does with a lot of things. I have heard a lot about Mrs. Doubtfire actually, that when they made it there was actually 3 or 4 different versions of it, and there was an NC-17 version, an R-rated version, a PG version and a PG-13 rated version, but released to the public there's only ever been the 2, the edited PG version and obviously the uncut PG-13 version, which is the 12 version that we have over here now. So what happened to those other stronger versions, the R-rated and the NC-17, we never know. Whether or not they were ever finished and released, I don't think they were. I think they were like, no, this is meant to be a family film, so obviously it's not going to be R-rated / a 15 or 18, is it? Because it's not really family friendly, is it? No. Next up are the 2 big ones, alright? And I've got stuff to hold up, so that's exciting, isn't it? The first big one to mention, I have mentioned a little bit before, because I've done a video on it before, but not in the same detail. I was talking about the film rather than the censorship side of it, so there's that. But Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Now, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was originally released as a PG. There are so many violent scenes in this film that were toned down to make it a PG, and then when you see this version, the 12 version, those bits are put back in. A lot of it was at the beginning, in the torture chamber at the beginning. A lot of that was cut down. There was a lot of the bits at the end when you see little Wolf holding on to the rope. A lot of that was toned down because obviously they don't like seeing close-ups of people being hung, especially small children, so a lot of that threat was toned down a lot as well. There's a moment where the Sheriff of Nottingham stabs the guy of Gisborne, and in the uncut version you see him actually stab him and penetrate him with the sword, as you might say, and that is cut out of the PG version and then put back in to the 12 version. And there is another bit right at the very end when the Sheriff of Nottingham is being extremely naughty and trying to take advantage of Maid Marian after they've just got married. You kind of see him holding her down on the ground, and there's an extra shot where you see the Sheriff of Nottingham forcing her legs open, which is obviously quite a graphic moment for a PG. Quite surprised you got away with that in a 12 as well, to be fair, because of the insinuation behind that. I didn't know you were allowed to insinuate sexual assault in a 12, but apparently you are. And lastly, this is the last one I'm going to mention today, but this is probably one of the most important ones I want to mention today. This box contains the uncut version of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Now, when Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was first given out to the cinema, the PG-13 didn't exist. In fact, I'm pretty sure from what I have read, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was one of the reasons that the PG-13 in the US was created, because they wanted to make this an X rating, and they were like, we can't make it an X rating, it's not violent enough or graphic enough to make it an X rating. They needed to put something in between the PG and the X rating, so then the X rating changed to an NC-17 and they released the R rating and the PG-13 rating as well, and this became a PG-13. But then they sent it over to England, and that was the problem. They sent it to England and they were just like, you're mental, right? We're not making that a PG, that's going to be an 18 if we release that over here. You're right, in the 80s they said we're going to release this as an 18, and then years later they were like, ah, fuck it, we'll just make it uncut as a 12. So you can see how the BBC standards have changed a lot. The scene, well, there are a couple of scenes actually, in fact there's about 4 or 5 scenes actually that are all affected in this film. The scene where the man has his heart removed is a lot more graphic in the 12 version than the PG version. You actually see him put his hand inside the man's chest and pull his heart out, and there's a lot more close-ups of the heart in the man's hand, including it being set on fire. You also see the guy in the cage being set on fire as well. That's probably the longest part of the film that was edited. There are loads of other little subtle moments all the way through, including Short Round being whipped. There's a lot of that was a bit longer. Pretty sure Indiana Jones calls one of the characters a bastard, which wasn't in the PG version. And look, just little things like that. There are a lot of details about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and what was cut, and that's where I'm gonna explain. So basically, everything in this video that you've seen today all comes from the infamous website www.movie-censorship.com, which is one of my favourite websites because I love to look at stuff that was cut and is now uncut, or look at stuff that was removed that will never be put back in and things like that. So if you want to see all the details from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, it is all on that website, as well as all the other films that I've mentioned today are all on that website as well. So there's that for you. Get on that website. It's an absolutely cracking website to get involved with. Do you know of any others, you British people? Did you see any PGs in the cinema that you've now watched later on and you think, I don't remember this being this violent, or I don't remember that swearing being there, or there was an extra sex scene like in Hot Shots 2? There's little things like that. Do you remember any of that? Leave a comment, yeah? Comment. But yeah, that's it for today. I'm going to leave the link to this movie censorship website down below as well, so you can have a little look. If you can't be bothered to type it in, you can just click on it. No, it's not difficult, is it? But pretty sure that's it for today. Yeah, I'm going to be back next week where I'm going to be talking about films that are edited for adults, so that's going to be an interesting one, isn't it? That's for today. That's it. I'm going to shut up now and let you get on with the rest of your day. I'll be back on Monday. Got a good one to show you Monday actually, so look forward to that. If you could like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'm going to fuck off. Okay? Goodbye.